Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chris Townsend. I am the Senior Marketing Director here at Imaginatik, and it's my pleasure to bring you the latest in our Innovation Masters series. Today's webinar is Your Teams Aren't Good Enough, and it's sort of a guide to collaboration in the 21st century world of work. We have Dr. Rob Spencer here. He is the Director of Research at Imaginatik and has a rich and storied history in the world of innovation and collaboration. Before we get into the content, I'd like to mention that we will be opening up to questions during the broadcast. So we have two places during today's presentation when we'll stop and answer all your questions. At those points, we will look for anything that you have typed into the questions panel on the GoToWebinar client, the desktop client. So at any time, you can go and type in that questions area any questions you have, and we'll answer them at the next break. And without further ado, I'm going to start off with a few words about Imaginatik for those of you that don't know us. We've been around for 16 years now, serving innovation in the enterprise, helping companies build a sustainable innovation function, and we've had the pleasure of working with a great number of wonderful organizations doing really, really important work to help innovation become part of the permanent culture of the way they work. These are a few examples of some of the results we've been able to achieve. In one case, we've been able to add $100 million in new product pipeline, and that's something that happens with a fair amount of frequency when we work on product innovation. We also do a lot of cost savings, operational improvements, efficiency gains, and we also work on breakthrough opportunities of various kinds, exploring new markets, working on blue oceans, finding great new products to push out into the marketplace, understanding your customers better. All of this is towards helping our clients develop sustainable innovation competence. So innovation, we know from our experience, is a discipline that can be architected across an organization where core skills can be learned and transferred and shared, and process can be scaled up to a often relatively large level, sometimes even completely global. There is a core process that we have developed over the years and that we know to be very, very successful, and that involves both a core creative process for coming up with the key insights, building them into ideas, and then a core business process for making decisions among all those ideas that have been submitted and developed, and then actually tracking and managing the path to those innovations becoming real as actual new products generating revenue, or new processes or ways of working that save money or make your enterprise more efficient. These are all skills that both apply to individuals throughout the organization and to your organization as a whole, so to teams and, in fact, to the entire company. When we're talking about building that innovation function on a wider level, we do have three core areas of focus as our advisory practice works with you to design the program and help to build it along with our software platform. So we work on strategy and planning, or charting the course for your innovation program. We work on developing those core skills that I showed before through actual projects that generate new ideas and breakthroughs. And we help you build that innovation discipline into the fiber of your company through skills building, knowledge transfer, training and development, and all kinds of things that help build the organizational skills on the ground across the board. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. It is Dr. Rob Spencer. We've had the great fortune of having him with us here at Imaginatik for 3 years as our Director of Research, and for a number of years before that as an Imaginatik client, being the lead innovation process architect at Pfizer. Rob has a long career in pharma in particular, nearly 30 years, and he has a lot of leadership experience both in running the business discipline of innovation and in using software to help enable mass collaboration on all kinds of different initiatives. And Rob is also a frequent speaker and guest lecturer. You can read his regular column in Research and Technology Management. I think Rob will talk a little bit more about that later. And he is one of the smartest people I've ever met and does a lot for us in building all kinds of cool new algorithms and tools to be used for some of today's leading innovation companies. With that, Rob, I'll pass things over to you, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, that was very nice. Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everyone. Happy to be with you today. And let me move that little thing out of the way where it's less distracting to me. So today's topic is a thought piece. I'm not selling you anything here. What I really want to do is get your attention and tell you a story that was important to me, 5 or 6 years ago now. As Chris mentioned, I spent nearly 30 years in the pharmaceutical company, most at Pfizer. And in the last 5 or so years of my career there, I made a voluntary transition because I was kind of tired of business as usual, and I was aware of these new technologies and processes. And Imaginatik was my vendor. But to convince myself, to make it an honest thing, to convince myself before I made that career jump, which was great, I've never regretted at all. But part of teaching myself that this is a valid thing to do is reflected in this talk. Meaning I had to look for patterns, and it's just the way I am, I suppose, as a biologist, experimental scientist. I had to dig into some anthropology, business history, and other what I'd call deep stuff. Not so much matters of opinion, but matters of things you can measure, things that are pretty solid. To convince myself that there was, first of all, at least one important problem to solve that was real, and not just about me, not about Pfizer, just kind of universal. And then that there was something we could do about it. So that's what today is. It's part of my own journey of building trust that there's something important here and that we can do something about it. So today's topic is your teams aren't good enough. So here it is in a nutshell. Here's the punchline. Traditional business teams can't possibly have the right expertise at the right time in today's rapidly changing global environment. There are ways to do better. Here's your little outline. I'm going to spend most of the time here talking about why the problem exists. And like I said, this is a little academic. And it'll be fast-paced, and it'll be full of facts, and I have references on the bottom of the slides and all that stuff. More than happy, as Chris said before, to share all this with you later. Why the problem exists will be things about knowledge and human capacity, teamwork and communication, and speed of change. And then at the end, we'll come into with, well, what are you going to do about it? And the broad brush answer, the generic answer is, well, it may not be the entire solution, but it's certainly something you can do that's well precedented and to the point, is enlist expertise much more broadly, specifically and just in time. And then I'll give you some examples. So people who know me tell me this is what it's like listening to one of these talks, drinking from a fire hose. This is a classic MIT prank somewhere in the hallways at MIT. The students build these things, and then they just leave them because they're so wonderful. So this is drinking from a fire hose. Here we go. Knowledge and human capacity. So these interesting looking fellows are Herbert Simon, who's the chess player there, Nobel laureate in economics and computer scientist, an amazing guy. And also down below is Malcolm Gladwell, who's a popular best-selling author of recent times. They did, Simon in some original research and Gladwell in a lot of like journalism type research, came up with the same conclusion with wonderful examples. And that is simply, it takes 10 years or 10,000 hours of experience to become world-class at anything. And their examples go everywhere, and they looked at everything. And it could be playing chess. It can be playing in being a rock star in a rock band. It can be playing the violin. It can be being an artist. It could be being an engineer. It could be doing anything. It takes 10 years or 10,000 hours of experience to become world-class at anything. And don't take my word for it. Have a look at the books. Gladwell's a little easier to read, a book called Outliers, where he goes into this with all kinds of interesting examples. But it really does seem, when you read through all this and you look at the references in the end to psychology and everything, that this is just part of being a human being. It's not a judgment about anything. It's not saying that a chess player is smarter or less smart than a rock star. Not at all. It's like what it takes for a human being to become really good at anything. We're going to dive into this a little more in case you need a little more convincing. Now, if anything, since those two books were published, if anything, there are hints out there that might even be getting harder than they said. And there's an interesting reference here, and the little graph the graph shows, if you can't read it, from 1985 to the turn of the century, to about 1999, that the age of first patent author of the age of the first patent author is increasing steadily, has been. Um, and that's interesting. And the hypothesis is of this article that the ever-growing burden of past knowledge, uh, which never goes away, knowledge never goes away, the ever-growing burden of past knowledge takes more and more time for people to absorb and build upon. And so it's getting harder and harder to be great anymore because you've got to absorb the stuff of the past, and there's simply massively more of it. So if anything, it's probably getting a little harder to be world-class at something. Why world-class? Why am I using that phrase? Isn't that a little arrogant? Well, I don't think so. I suppose if your business is a restaurant or a barbershop, or anything that has the property like those do of being geographically limited. I mean, roughly speaking, if a restaurant or barbershop is more than 20 minutes away, or if another business is more than 20 minutes or so away, it's not really a competitor because people have that rough radius where they'll go to somewhere. So if there's a brilliant, low-cost barbershop an hour away, it's not your competitor because that you have different markets. But other than some examples of that general type, everything is going global. And here are some examples from a variety of sources noted at the bottom, whether it's financial markets, physical merchandise in the upper right, or a broad-based globalization index of a whole bunch, every country in the world. I just picked out a few big ones: Brazil, Canada, France, India, so forth. Everything says in the past 30 years, decade or more that these charts cover, everything is going global. And that's because communication is essentially becoming free worldwide, instantaneous and free. The internet's a big part of the internet, and the pervasive generations of cell phones, inexpensive communication technologies. The world is getting global extremely fast. So it's very likely, again, unless you have some restriction, like a restaurant or some variation on that theme, that your business is in fact global. Your competition, your markets are in fact global. So world class is not a trite phrase here. It's pretty serious about the products and services you need to build and create to compete. So let's put a little more stuff, a little more background on this idea of what it means to have great world-class expertise, and maybe a little more credibility of why it may take 10 years or 10,000 hours to achieve it. Now this is meant to be a little pyramid. It's not meant to be receding in space. It's meant to be a pyramid. And it's called Bloom's taxonomy. And it's a useful scale that's used generally to measure educational achievement. We all start at the bottom, and we may or may not climb the pyramid, if you will. Let's just go through it briefly. So the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy is remember. And this has words like recognize and recall. So this is familiar. This is like learning your multiplication tables in elementary school, or your addition tables, etc. You simply remember it. At some point in the remember phase, you're just doing rote learning. You don't really understand it yet, but you are remembering stuff. This is the way history is taught badly, remembering and tested, remembering and regurgitating lots of little facts, but without context and what you call understanding. The next level up the taxonomy, and you see why one builds on another, is understanding. And at that point, when I understand something well, and I can interpret, classify, summarize, or compare things, when I get a little more expertise, a little more experience and knowledge, then I can start to apply that knowledge, and I can execute and implement things. A little more expertise, a little more experience, and I become capable of analyzing things, and I can organize and attribute and differentiate things. Even more, I can evaluate, check, and critique, and at the top of Bloom's taxonomy basically is create. And at that point, I have enough experience, confidence, knowledge of other stuff that's going on in the world that I can create new things. I can plan, I can produce it, and I can create new things that haven't been done before. So it's a scale of achievement. Let's put a little on this. So pick out your company on the left. There's some big blue arrows there on the left. If your company is basically a survivor mode in a mature market, then it's probably okay that most of your or all of your employees are at the bottom 3 levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And I'm not, there's no judgment here really. It's just the way it is. So if you're pushing papers, you're filling out forms, it could be white collar or blue collar type work. If you're making widgets on the assembly line, the way you always did it, or your parents did it, or even your grandparents did it, and you're surviving in a mature market, it's okay to do that. You remember, you understand, and you apply the knowledge, and nothing much changes, and that's okay. Well, is it? If you want to be a follower company, meaning that you're not creating things, but you're doing fast follower of other people's innovations, um, you can debate till the cows come home, Samsung versus Apple or something like that, let's say. But then you need to be more to be a good follower. You need to be able to analyze and understand what a leader has done and do it well and quickly. That takes a little more skill, a little up higher the hierarchy. If you want to be a leader, you have to create new things. So you can see how it matters on the bottom. What I assert is you can't lead a dynamic market with rote behavior. Your people, your employees have to generate change to do anything but rote behavior. And to generate change, you have to have subject matter mastery. And it's climbing this pyramid with a significant number of your people, either as an individual that takes 10 years, or it takes people who have that in your company, so that you can lead and you can be world class in anything in the company. Now, here's a little sidebar. Not only is Bloom's taxonomy a good thing for a company to think about in terms of the distribution of skills in its employees, it's actually good for every individual. So if we look at this, and that's why Bloom's here is a handy way to categorize it. If all you know is, or the limits of your skill set are in the bottom 3 levels of Bloom's taxonomy, guess what? Your job is made to order for outsourcing or being done in software. There are loads of references I could give you if you wanted, we could talk about, for things that were once considered very safe. That would be like small town lawyer filling out forms, or accountancy, CPAs, more or less filling out forms. They're complicated processes, but they don't change. They remember them and they understand them and they apply them, but they stamp things, they move papers from here to there, they check the boxes, they move it along. Well, guess what? Those professions, those honorable white-collar professions, are being gutted now by software and by outsourcing to India or some lower-cost place, because you don't need to climb very high up Bloom's taxonomy to do those well. They just are like that. And so Bloom's taxonomy is a great way to look at it and introspect about yourself and your own career aspirations and needs, as well as for a senior manager, about what you encourage in your company. So we're going to make our first look. That's that. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. And why all that background? It's because the punchline here, the complexity of modern project exceeds any one person's knowledge. Let's say you have somebody who did spend 10 years or 10,000 hours on it. Well, Simon makes it a useful little, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's also a bit serious. Herbert Simon also makes a little estimate in the same book that expert can now, what he or she has acquired is maybe 50,000 chunks of useful knowledge. And he's not quibbling about factors of 2 here, but he's probably right within a factor of 10. And at least in my old field in pharmaceuticals, if I think about creating a new product, a new pharmaceutical product, it's extremely easy to get up to a number somewhere around 50,000 if I add up all the little factoids that go into the 14-year life cycle of producing a new pharmaceutical. Because somebody or other has to dip into chemistry, biology, patent law, toxicity, drug distribution, marketing, formulation, did I say patent and legal, business competitive analysis, on and on and on and on and on. When you add up all the disciplines and all the details and everything in there, you get way more than something like 50,000. It's a simple numeric way to say what we all know is it takes teams to produce new things. The time when Leonardo could do it all are past. Although Leonardo was brilliant, he can usually finish a lot of things. But even he could, finish a unit of work by himself. Not anymore. It's all about teamwork. And by the way, another little note on the bottom. It may be getting worse in that software is so much of a key component of so many products. I read not long ago that the number of person hours involved, or maybe it was the salary involved in building an automobile, is the software and the firmware involved in all its computer systems is now comparable in cost to the steel and the aluminum and everything else. And software systems may be the most complex things ever created by mankind. And there's good references there too. So again, teamwork is not an option for modern products. That's the punchline. Okay, first pause. Chris, I guess I'll let you relay things verbally.
Thanks. Yeah, Rob, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Rob?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we're going to take a first break for questions here. Remember, everybody, there's a questions panel in the GoToWebinar controls. Feel free to type any questions you have in there, and we'll answer them as we go along. We have a couple so far. I'll start from the earliest one. So, Rob, you're talking about the 10,000 hours to become an expert in something.
Right.
Does that apply to? Uh, I'm wondering, how to put that in the context of um, the business process and innovation and collaboration. Does someone become an expert in innovation per se? Is that something that the 10,000 hours rule applies to?
That's a curious question. I suppose it could, but you can tell, I suppose, maybe I'm interjecting a little uh, personal bias here. I'm probably more thinking about the people you want to find. We'll get into this theme at the end. If you can't create that knowledge or that 10-year expertise in somebody, can you find it? That's a theme we'll come into at the end. Well, let's see. I'll speak for myself. It took me in the first two. Let's put it this way. Maybe I didn't climb all the way up the possibility, but and I had this job at Pfizer of being what you'd call an innovation coordinator. I ran 240 events or challenges. I would say it took me well into my second year before I found my feet, and
Hmm.
that was a full-time job. So that wasn't 10,000 hours, but it was half that. And maybe I wasn't world class, but I was certainly company class at that time. That was two years of a full-time job before I really uh, felt that I knew what I was doing, and if you threw any situation at me, I could pretty much handle it. And that's just in what you call innovation coordinator. So I think, yeah, I think it applies there too.
Okay. Okay. Good. Yeah, that I can see what you mean. Another question we have is about motivation for people supporting innovation. How do we motivate teams to really support what say the innovation function is doing at a company?
Okay. Um, that's a little off the theme here, but let's try. How do you motivate teams to support innovation? Well,
Yeah. So maybe if
well,
you
there's
know
a huge. This is an enormous topic.
let's
One
break it
way,
down a little bit. Maybe we
yeah,
can say if you're thinking about building expertise in
right,
innovation inside the company,
right.
how do you split that up and
Well,
get create the different
okay.
kinds of expertise in the organization?
The I would start. My personal take would be start at the top because it doesn't happen there. It's all just hot air and it isn't going to last. So a lot of this is what senior management does. A simple example would be, but not a cheap one, is to just take examples across various industries and see what percent of sales they devote to R&D
Hmm.
as a uh, in the Menlo Park sense, in the Lockheed sense, in the Skunk Works sense. So pharmaceuticals is about 12 plus minus percent of gross goes into R&D. I think chip makers and all that, roughly speaking, maybe 8-ish plus minus percent. Software companies will be up in the 10%. Um, Automobiles is low, much lower. Automotive is lower, and I don't mean marketing. I mean hard ass R&D. Um, so if your company doesn't devote resource to it, and I don't mean token, I mean serious, 10% of gross is a lot of money. All right.
Hmm.
If you don't generate that, you don't, or I don't mean the percent, but if you don't dedicate that and hire people to do it and make it a real job with real goals, real objectives, real everything, integrated with a business, then you're not serious, or you're not biting the bullet and doing it. Now we can
Okay.
dive in more deeply. Let's take another variation, maybe close it out. Um, Another way to do it, it helps if you have R&D, but maybe there are other ways to do this, meaning open innovation. Another classic way, which was Jack Welch was famous for, I'm not saying he was the nicest guy in the world in history terms, but one thing that seems to be effective about him, I believe, is he took his senior VPs. Now, these would be operational managers who had profit and loss goals every quarter, and that's often thought to be a killer of innovation. But they were given broad goals that says something to the effect that within 2 years, 30% of your cash flow will come from products less than 5 years old, something like that. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, a great big goal like that is perfect for a senior manager because it doesn't specify exactly what the thing is. It just gives you a broad goal. And you can't achieve 30% cash flow on products less than 5 years old if you're sitting on your backside. That is a wonderful spur to get those people to look broadly and think hard about how do I innovate. And importantly, the important thing about this example, it's down in that same nitty gritty, often thought to be evil to innovation, the profit and loss, money driven supply and demand manager type. And you can do it. You just have to put in goals in place like that.
Right, right. Sort of create the objectives and then
Yep.
give them the,
Yep.
the space to go figure out how to do it.
If it's a hobby, I'm using harsh words here. If your company treats it as a hobby, we need to be more innovative. But they don't supply resource or tangible goals. Sorry, it's not going to happen.
Okay, good. Let's take one more question, and then in the interest of time, I think we'll
Yeah,
keep going
we'll
with the
boogie.
presentation. So there's a question here about using agile methods. So obviously this is a very common practice in software development, but increasingly agile
Right.
is a philosophy that's used in all
Right.
kinds of processes. Does this do anything to accelerate how fast you can build expertise and move up the pyramid?
I don't think so. If I'm reading my Gladwell and my Herbert Simon right, we're into anthropology here. We're into human limitations and how much stuff you can cram in your head. So my first reaction is reading those guys and looking through the references. I'll know this is intrinsic to Homo sapiens. Now it might be true that you can get partway up the ladder. So I know it's not like an absolute. It's suddenly magic at 10,000 hours. It might be that you can be good enough for the task at hand, or better than you would normally be, with a kind of a force feeding. Now, I'm not going to say whether that's strictly agile or not. I suspect it's mostly about focused time on the discipline at hand, and I'm
Right.
not sure it matters a hell of a lot whether I sit in the library, meaning a student. Well, let's take a PhD student. Or a postdoc. A postdoc is 3 years of agony of doing nothing but cramming that Gladwell time as intensely as you possibly can to achieve complete mastery in 2 years or so. It's barely possible. It's exhausting, but that's a force feed. Yeah, to some extent.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I suppose there's also a dynamic where if it's agile methods are used across teams or groups, whereas the 10,000 hours I think usually applies to individuals and what they can learn, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think Agile and Six Sigma and all of its related kin are more about finding efficiency and avoiding waste of time or money, as opposed necessarily to developing individual expertise.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Let's keep going. I want to make sure we do have enough time for wrap-up questions at the end. So back to you.
I have 11:30, so let's roll. Teamwork and communication. Now, my segue, of course, before was no one individual can hope to do it all anymore with the complexity of modern products and the need to be globally competitive. So let's have some funny little factoids about teamwork and communication. Well, first of all, teamwork. This is one that really is a matter of opinion, but I've never had anybody disagree with it, and you can tell me later if you agree or disagree. And that is that most of the time, managers assign people to a project team, and I'm thinking mostly in the sense, it could be anything, but I'm thinking mostly like a new product development team or a new service development team. Mostly for these three reasons, and roughly speaking in this order. First, they do it because they're within the manager's authority. Now, I know Joe really, really knows the Brazilian market for this, but he reports over there somewhere else in that other division. He's probably busy. I don't have the clout or the quid pro quo to get Joe on my project, so I'll do the best I can within the people in my authority. That's every team I've ever formed when I was an executive director at Pfizer or anybody else did, mostly ran on those lines. The team I form is the ones who report to me. Second, you do it because they have some time. They'll be coming off something. I know about that. They can have anywhere from 20 to 100% of their time on this new project, this new task force or initiative. And they have appropriate skills and knowledge. My experience is is an important consideration. It's the kind of the last thing that's involved, and it's used for pruning the size of the team to just what we need. So there you have it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this. This to me is what it means to form a traditional business team. Well, here's another funny little factoid. Again, it's a little more quantitative, but it's still kind of a consensus. And that is that teams have to be small to be effective. Brooks' Law states this in a rather amusing way. Fred Brooks' wonderful book, Mythical Man Month, at the bottom of the page there. And that is the way to slow down an overdue project is to put more people on it. Um, when you go out and you talk to experienced managers, you find over and over, you say, what's the right size for an effective team? And you get numbers of somewhere between 3 to 8. Um, it's one of those things where I hate to say it, but everybody knows. But it is one of those cases where everybody knows that once you get over a dozen people, you get into logistic problems. Not everybody can show up next Tuesday. You get into wasting problems where they're going to have sidebar conversations or sit in the back of the room during their email, fiddling with their, I almost said Blackberries, that's old I am, fiddling with things, not paying full attention because they are not on this exact topic at the moment, and that's not effective. And it just gets hard to control all that in a team. So 3 to 8 people is a good range. So that sets part of our dilemma up. Here's another, this gets to what I like, the little quantitative things that are interesting and seem surprising, but the data are so good that you just have to kind of say, wow. So an interesting study a couple of years ago, people looked at Cornell University. They did all the proper things for anonymizing their data, but they looked at 43,000 people, students, faculty, everybody at Cornell, over the course of a year and analyzed 14 million messages, emails, I don't know what all, okay, in that universe. And they, among other interesting things with all this, is they asked about the probability of people communicating if there were no driving force to do so. So I put it down below at the bottom, and let's say on the left, Alice there. Let's say Alice is a sponsor of a project. She's on a team, and she might need certain detailed information about something or other from somebody who has that 10 years of expertise in something. Donna over at the right has that 10 years. Unless they're deliberately brought together, the probability of Alice finding out what Donna knows is essentially 0. So based on this study, you see the daily probabilities of people who have no other reason to communicate goes down, you get 3 degrees of freedom away, and it's a daily probability of 1 in a million, which means it isn't going to happen, or the half-time for it happening is measured in years. So the lesson here is a harsh one that we just need to know, is that you have to do something deliberate to bring knowledge into play, because it isn't going to happen just by magic, just by wishing. Somebody in the company knows some really arcane piece of European patent legislation that's actually really quite important to this project right now. Well, that's probably true. You're never going to find it unless you do something very active and effective to find out who that person is. It doesn't happen by chance. So that's the lesson here. Okay, speed of change. Another topic, I'm switching gears, but this will all come together at the end. Now this chart, I hope you can read the legend on it, is really interesting to look at. The colored lines, each colored line is a major technology, and it's electricity, radio, automobile, telephone, clothes washer, dishwasher, computer, cell phone, all kinds of household technologies. The bottom axis goes from 1900 to 1996, this particular study. I've done my own things on the web, and I've added a few other technologies since then, like social media, smartphones, and things like that, to it to bring it up to the present. But it's the same trend. And the vertical axis is the technology adoption. What percentage of U.S. households, this is a U.S. survey, it's probably similar everywhere in the developed world, what percentage of households have one of these things? So we can see that red line is easy to spot. That's the telephone. So the telephone has something like 5% market share in the year 1900. And it bobbles around. It goes down a little in the Depression in the 1930s, and then it goes up. And by the time we're at the present, we're up to 95% of people have a landline telephone, of American households have a landline telephone. Pick another one. There's a bright blue one starting at 1960. That's color TV. That has a very steep curve. So in the 1960s and 70s, color TV goes from essentially nil up to about 80% in 1975, 1980. And at this point, it's pushing in at 98% of households have a colored TV. Okay? So this is the extent and the rate of technology adoption in U.S. households. Well, to look at that a little more, I took that chart and I took some other data, and I just picked rather arbitrarily. I said, well, let's take the slice between 20 and 80% adoption of households. We're going to call that market saturation, from the beginnings to getting close to the market saturation, 20 to 80. And that's the length of each bar here. So in the top of the graph, you see telephone, car, and electricity. And for telephone and car, we can see for telephone, to get from 20 to 80% household adoption in the US was, what, 20, 40, 60 years to achieve that. For car, about the same. We go down the middle, we see washing machine. That was 40, 50 years. Dishwasher, 50, 60 years to go from 20 to 80% household adoption. But now look down at the bottom in the lower right. The things that are now within our lifetime, that was our parents and grandparents. But now within our lifetime, what we're getting, and I think this is a build slide, let's see. Yeah. Within our lifetimes, we're seeing microwave, VCR, internet, cell phone, home broadband, social networks are now hitting 20 to 80% adoption in U.S. households very fast. Under 20 years, and in many cases under 10 years. The median of all these recent ones is about 8 years to achieve 20 to 80% market adoption in the U.S. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is part of that pace of change we're talking about, and here's some numbers on it. So let's look at other things that happen that recognize that are about pace of change. Again, a lot of references at the bottom. Jobs. The median duration of a job, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of the Census in the U.S., very recent, is about 2.5 years. And as I read through that study, I don't just think this means being promoted from assistant sales manager to associate sales manager. This is a major job change. Okay, so they're somewhere between simple promotion, job change, and career change. This is in the middle. Whatever it means, you can read through to mean a significant job change. And that's only about 2.5 years now. Wow. The median tenure of S&P 500 CEOs is now 6 years. And as we all know, when a CEO changes for any reason, retirement, ouster, merger and acquisition, it frequently, if not mostly, means a major strategic change of the company. So CEO's tenure now is about 6 years. I showed you in the previous 2 slides about technology saturation, 20 to 80% saturation, is now about 8 years. So now look at the one we started out in this whole talk about, which is acquiring deep expertise, 10 years. And here's what's interesting, the big letters. Those first 3 numbers, this is the first time in history. For our parents and certainly our grandparents, those top 3 things weren't true. Your job tenure wasn't 2.5 years on average. It was a lot longer. CEO tenure was a lot longer than 6 years. I don't know what it was. Technology saturation, as we saw in that previous chart, was a lot longer. It was more like 10, 20, 30, 40 years for this 20 to 80 technology saturation. But so now, this is the point of this change, and this is why there's some uncertainty here. We don't know, this has never happened before. This has never happened before, that the rate of business change, measured in job, CEO turnover, and technology change, is now faster than it takes somebody to acquire world-class expertise. This is unique. And this is a brave new world. So let's bring it all together. Quick summary of where we are so far. Our finite human capacity and the complexity of projects demands teamwork. Team membership is usually based on the sponsor's authority and members' availability. Effective teams need to be small. Left alone, people don't communicate outside their sphere. To create new products in global markets, team members need expertise, deep expertise. Such expertise takes a decade to acquire, and the pace of change today is well under 10 years. That's why I say your teams aren't good enough, or business as usual is not good enough. That's the bottom line. That's the underlying story. So, another pause, and let's see what we got here. This is stirring those juices. Chris?
All right, Rob, thank you very much. Couple questions. So you talked about making connections for outside knowledge. To what degree could an organization use incentives as a way of making those connections happen more regularly?
We probably have to talk about inside versus outside your firewall, I think, first.
Okay.
All my experience says that. So let's try both of them quickly. Inside the firewall, what do you say? After 3 coffee cups, I don't need a fourth, which is a silly way of saying I think the T-shirts and the coffee cups are okay to launch a program, but they will not sustain any kind of a program. They become silly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll discard that. And by that I also mean, all the way up to the iPad thing. Get an iPad. I don't think so. First of all, you get into a very dangerous game of, well, next year I want to run another initiative. Damn, I can't do an iPad again. Do we have the budget for something even fancier? You get on a very nasty, ugly cycle of expectations of your audience. Or if your sponsor says, I'm not doing that shit. This is the business of the company. I'm not giving the prizes. Are they then hurt by the previous expectation there have to be prizes? You'll run into another barrier there. At least I did at Pfizer when this came up, which is over a very nominal amount. You're required by law, depending on the state you're in and everything else, to have that as declared income. And then the bureaucratic stuff with taxation and finance is so massive that you're just not going to do it. It ain't legal. Or finance will have none of it because you're outside the rules of HR, compensation, everything else. So there are a lot of reasons why you don't want to do that. It's also demotivating, but that's a whole nother talk about, this goes into Teresa Amable's work on creativity. The tangible rewards are actually not only neutral, they're worse than neutral, they're actually demotivating. There's some very interesting, that's a long talk. Now you go outside. That's inside. So inside, I wouldn't do it at all. Not tangible. Recognition is great. The most important thing by everything you read about Frederick Hertzberg on the motivation to work and all the Gallup books on motivation and engagement at work is make the task meaningful. Give me the confidence that my input will be used for something important. That's the single most important thing to do. So if your innovation challenge isn't hitting those buttons, it's probably not worth running. It has to be meaningful. Never, never, never run a toy problem. Because you will kill your brand, as it were, and trivialize it. Always make it real. Go after the big stuff first and hit it hard. Now, when you go outside, I suppose my best example there's Innocentive. And interesting, you can't find out exact details, but I wonder if that isn't struggling. Now, I have a massive respect for Innocentive. They're the ones who offer bounties, cash bounties. But first of all, it hasn't grown much, and they've been doing this for a dozen or more years. It hasn't grown much. They're still a very small company. This is still a very limited thing. And their bounties, by the way, run on the order of $10,000 to $40,000. Why? Because to get that deep expertise, you have to pay people enough to make them switch from using that expertise from doing something else. Meaning you have to do serious money for serious, you get what you pay for. So I think that works there probably, although it's a limited marketplace. But it's not trivial by any means. You have to be willing to put up $10,000 to $40,000 for each challenge you run in Innocentive. And as far as I know, others are not so different in that market.
Yeah,
So
very interesting. Rob, I'm going to suggest that we hold. There's a couple other questions, but I want to make sure we get through the rest of the presentation first. Okay. So we'll return to there are a few other questions. We'll return to those at the end when we have time.
Good. Okay. What to do? Okay. What I've done now is given you what some people might say is bad news. Your teams aren't good enough with a whole lot of academic reasons, but serious reasons why they're probably not. Too often, people stop at the first two. I don't want to hear it. That's icky. It makes my head hurt. I think that might be true, but I don't want to hear it. So I'll just forget I ever heard this. Stick your head in the sand. I've certainly got that many times in my career. I've also gotten the one on the right, which is shoot the messenger or shoot the data. If somebody goes in and quibbles about any of those references or any of the slides, I'm sorry, but they're missing the point, and they're doing it deliberately because they don't want to hear it. They don't like evolution, or they don't like global warming. By the way, those aren't controversial. In the same way here, I don't like that data that says about telephones and cell phones and things. So I'm going to go pick at the data, and no, you're missing the larger picture if you shoot the messenger. So the response to bad news, first of all, it isn't bad news. It's just factual stuff. But it's going to take courage to respond otherwise. So let's go into that. And if you want a little appeal to authority, if you will, I can't think of a better one than this book, Gary Hamel, In the Future of Management. Now, this book is bad news, quote unquote, for rather different reasons, but very profound about the nature of management, how conservative it is. And interesting, though, is what he concludes at the very end. So it's kind of bleak. This book is kind of bleak when you get to it. He basically says, if your company isn't like these handful of great examples I've found, you're screwed. But he does offer you one hope at the end, and it's right at the end. I encourage you to read it. He says, for thousands of years, markets and hierarchies are the only alternatives when it came to aggregating human effort. And remember, we need expertise, and that's why we're into teams. That's why we're aggregating human effort. Now he says there's a third option, real-time distributed networks. And what he's specifically talking about in that whole final chapter is using internet technology. Couldn't agree more. So let's get more specific. So if you want an answer, I'm not saying it's the whole answer to this teamwork and expertise problem, I would, as an individual, as a manager, as a company, start managing your expert knowledge, let's just say inside the company, with the same care that you give to your supply chain, and take it just as damn seriously. And that means giving your teams the tools to tap in your company's knowledge and expertise in a need-specific, just-in-time way. Examples from Pfizer. Let's just go right to examples. So Chris mentioned this at the intro. I built and ran about 240 challenges inside Pfizer from audiences of 20,000 people. And here are a few of those, just 4 stories that highlight this particular sub-theme about those. So these slides are also available from a presentation I gave in Pfizer Days. It's public domain now, all approved by Pfizer, a long time ago. But I'm picking up 4 stories here, okay, of these case studies. So really quickly here, these are focused challenges that need deep expertise. The first one, and these both have the common theme that I need somebody with that 10-year world-class knowledge. They're probably somewhere in the, I might need a few of them actually for this project. They're somewhere in their company, but I don't know where they are, and they don't report to my boss or me, but how am I going to find them? So the first story was that Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, if nothing else, is very predictable in its pipeline because of the regulatory timelines that are imposed on it, which is fine. But Pfizer knew a few years ago that they had a gap coming up in their product line. Filling that gap takes the logical form of starting phase 3 clinical trials, which is a fairly late stage, as quickly as you can. At that point, we can probably have a high probability of getting to market fast. So what we did is we went out to 20,000 people, and we said, what do we have? Scrape around. Can we repurpose other drugs for these clinical trials? Now that worked very well. We went out to maybe 20,000, maybe it was 15,000. Anyway, we went out to lots and lots of people and got about a 1% response rate. Now, why am I pointing that out? If you go to some more socially oriented individuals or guidelines at all about this kind of thing, you say 1% is terrible. No, it's actually great. For this one, for this kind of a problem, I'm looking for the 10-year expertise here. We got 100+ entries, all of which were detailed and specific and serious for these what we call secondary indications, which are exactly one, and one of them was funded for this. That's 100 more than 0. And 1% response of that quality is absolutely fantastic. There's nothing whatsoever wrong with that. The one with the cow on the bottom was kind of similar. In this case, Pfizer, like other big companies, typically splits its veterinary divisions away from its human care divisions, largely because they have very different timelines, very different regulatory environments, very different market things. The cost of treatment for a cow has to be much, much, much less than a human, and all kinds of other things. But actually, our biochemistry inside is not so different, and the diseases are not so very different, really. But because the people are in different divisions, or they're acquired by merger and acquisition, they don't know each other. So once again, the electronic medium of an innovation challenge is a brilliant way to tap some of these 10-year, decade-long experts in an entirely other division. Just state the problem carefully in terms that are universal from cows to humans and other things. And that's actually not hard to do when you talk to the people who know. So that works really well. Another couple more examples. The one on the top was related to the earlier problem about filling a gap in your product pipeline. In this case, we did it as a speed date. If you don't know about how to run a speed date, and I don't mean boys and girls, I mean people who have knowledge and people who need knowledge. A speed date is a wonderful process. It's a little, takes some care and thought in setting up well, but it works amazingly well for this. So we ran a 3-stage speed date at Pfizer New York headquarters and turned up 73 previously undocumented ideas that could enter the product pipeline, as it were, out of by magic. And the people participating were senior VPs. They didn't like going there. They were really grumpy. And at the end of it, They were exhausted. We boogied them for 5 hours hard without breaks. At the end of it, they were exhausted and they were absolutely staggered about what they knew they didn't know they knew. And we pulled 73 product ideas out of them that were significant and real, and they didn't know they knew it because it's such a complicated situation. And the last one is, you had a question before about agile or lean. The last one is a bit like that. In this case, the company had a process which was taking something like 6 months with some complicated regulatory documents. If you looked at it from the abstract, it looked like a fairly simple thing, but this 6 months was very well established. It was kind of the industry standard, but it was still very frustrating. And so again, we used electronic media to get all the grassroots knowledge, all that long experience of the people who'd been doing this for a very long time, and get down to the nitty-gritty. This takes, here's an example of ferocious dive into details, and sure enough, I think they cut 2 months off this process. But it took an electronic medium and aggregated into lots and lots of people to get to that level of detail and actionable detail. So running challenges out to thousands of people is really well precedented and reliable and low risk. It just works. So if your team is limited in size and limited in expertise, for all those other reasons, that's fine. Let that team be the ones who manage such a challenge and essentially multiply their effectiveness in these things requiring expert. They can multiply their effectiveness massively at very low risk and cost. Doing such a challenge is very different from managing people who are full-time people. That's a whole nother long story. Do talk to us because crafting good talent does take experience, and there's some non-obvious best and worst practices. We're back into voluntary behavior, long tails of voluntary behavior, how you motivate people to participate, and all the rest. It's not obvious, and the rules that apply to small teams where it's your paid job are very, very different in these virtual teams. But it's well known. It's been studied a lot, and that's why we're here. So please talk to us. My last slide. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're up.
In about 5 minutes. We're all right.
Just because I love this movie. There's really nothing wrong with Salieri. He's a competent musician. He's personable, although this is a bad picture of him here. He's talking to the king. He kisses up to the king really well. Well, so do a lot of middle managers. He's trying his best, but he's mediocre. What can you say? He's normal. He's mediocre. And if you had to pick a team, you probably have lots of Salieris in your teams, and that doesn't mean they're bad people. It's just that's because you picked them because they were available and they reported to you. But for a given, and who's a Mozart will depend on what the expertise is and what the project is. But the point is, if you just pick by the old-fashioned ways to form a team, the odds are you're just going to get Salieris all the time. To find that Mozart in there is going to take behaving differently. And large-scale electronic challenges that are unintrusive, that are direct and to the point, thoughtfully worded, work beautifully to find your Mozart. By the way, if you wanted to know, what prompted when Chris and I were talking about this webinar was I just got this published in Research Technology Management, and feel free to ask us for reprints and details. And by the way, you can also ask, and I'll give Chris the details, the magazine publisher is hosting a little call-in discussion this Friday in a couple of days, about noontime Eastern time, for a call-in. I'm just going to moderate a call-in discussion period. Nothing really to do with Imaginatik. This is more just about the topic. I'm going to continue the chat there, and you're perfectly invited to call in. So Chris, back to you.
All right, thank you, Rob. We're going to take a few remaining questions. Again, there is a questions panel in the GoToWebinar desktop client. Please type your questions into that panel, and we will answer them. I want to mention really quickly. I'm going to take back screen controls here. Give me 1 second. Okay. Rob, you can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So one plug for something that's coming up, for those of you especially who come to a lot of our webinars and appreciate the content, our next Innovation Leaders Forum will be on April 23rd, so about 2 months from now. We will soon have a bunch of materials to send out, and it will be on the Imaginatik website. It is not yet, but that will happen within the next few days. The theme for this one that we find is increasingly gaining a large set of attention is building the enterprise innovation function. So that means how do you really institute innovation in a larger and larger way in your organization over time, often involving quite a bit of leadership and courage, as Rob talked about today. So we have a great lineup of corporate innovation leaders that are coming as speakers, including Moises Norena from Whirlpool. He is the Global Director of Innovation at Whirlpool, and Phil Swisher, who some of you may remember from a recent webinar. He's the SVP of Global Innovation at Brown Brothers Harriman, and several others. So stay tuned for details on that, and if you're interested in coming and want to reserve a spot, please do send me an email. You see my email address there. And if anyone has any questions about this webinar, you can contact either Rob or myself. We'll be happy to answer them, and as Rob mentioned, we always love to hear from you. With that said, we have just a few short minutes. Let's try and get to one or two of these questions. Rob, I'm wondering. Let's see. Hold on a sec. I want to pick out a good one here. When you talk about the phase 3 clinical trials challenge, how broadly was that? How broad was the audience that was sent to, that was involved?
Right. I think I probably exaggerated as I went through. I would say 10 to 15,000 people. And it's an interesting one because it was my job, and I say maybe it is for many of the listeners. I did these challenges all the time in my company. I wanted people to keep coming, and that means I had to take. I felt because I knew this was going to be. This is a technically focused one. It was actually a series of challenges about the same topic. One would have said, what can we do with a non-selective muscarinic antagonist not in diabetes, let's say. Now, that's a funny, what's all that mean? Well, it means something to some people. And that's the point. But it's equally important not only to go big, but then to exclude people. So I play my probabilities, and I wouldn't send those kind of challenges, let's say, to people in finance or HR or manufacturing. With all due respect, I don't want to clog their emails because it's just that targeted kind of thing. I did select, with help from, as part of my job, to find out, get mailing lists of people who are, let's say, clinicians. In that case, it was wonderful, hard to get a hold of, but pharmaceutical companies have regional, has physicians in their employ in other countries to help run phase 4 regulatory clinical trials. So we'd go to specific targeted groups like that. In other words, do the best you can. This is why it helps to be along in the business, to be an innovation coordinator, because you know who knows. And for those kind of challenges, because they were such big deals and they had such payout, I went poking around to find out everything I could about who would be likely to be able to help, and then built custom mailing lists and did it that way.
Great, thanks. That's excellent, Rob. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this wonderful perspective. Again, for anyone that has questions or wants to follow up, there's our contact information. Thanks again to everyone who came today, and hopefully you enjoyed the talk, and we'll see you again for the next Innovation Master Series webinar coming up shortly. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.